Hello there, welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Galaxy, where humans face the unknown, outsmart the impossible, and turn every test into victory. So sit back and let the story begin.
The machine did not look like a weapon. That was the first thing Dara Ose noticed about IT, that IT looked like something a god had left behind after deciding it did not need it anymore. 60 feet tall, dark silver, with joints that moved like water and armor plates that overlapped like the scales of something alive. No visible weapon ports. No exposed waiting. Nothing that caught the eye and said, here is where is weak. Because there was no weak part. Everyone said so. The engineers said so. The scans said so. The battle records from 14 different war zones said so. The Draenei called it Karathsul. In their language, that meant the one that cannot fail. Dara crouched beside its left lower joint and chewed the inside of her cheek. She had been awake for 19 hours. Her hands were stained with coolant dye from a shuttle repair she had finished at midnight, and she had a bruise on her left elbow from where she had slipped on a wet deck plate 2 days ago. She was not a commander. She was not a scientist. Her official coalition rank was Salvage and Maintenance Specialist, 3rd grade, which was a long title that meant she fixed things that other people broke and occasionally broke things that other people needed to fix. Nobody had asked her to be here. Commander Saul had said very quietly during the briefing, take a look at it when you get a chance. That was all. Not an order. Not even really a request. Just a suggestion from a man who had learned, over 6 years of working alongside Dara, that she sometimes saw things other people did not. So she looked. The Coalition had captured the machine 4 days ago during a Draenei retreat on the moon Sever 4. The retreat had been fast and panicked enough that the Draenei left it behind, which the Coalition intelligence officer said was either a mistake or a trap. Nobody had touched the machine since. They had scanned it from every angle, fed the data into 7 different analysis systems, and held 3 separate briefings. The conclusion of all 3 briefings was the same. Do not touch it, do not move it, and start thinking about how to surrender with dignity, because if the Draenei came back to get it, there was nothing the Coalition could do. The formal briefing that morning had been held in the main operations room of the forward base. Rowe, the lead engineer from the Velan Collective, had presented for 40 minutes. Rowe was tall, gray-skinned, and spoke with the calm confidence of someone who had never once been wrong about anything technical. The presentation was precise. The data was clear. Every known weapon system, every attack pattern, every form of kinetic, thermal, energy-based, and sonic assault had been tested against Karathsul's design specs in simulation. All of them failed. The machine's armor used something Rowe called a resonance matrix. Dara had not fully followed the technical details, but the core idea was simple enough. The armor did not just absorb force, it read force. It detected the incoming vector, speed, and energy signature of any attack in the first fraction of a second of contact, then distributed resistance across the entire hull to counteract it. The harder you hit it, the better it adapted. The more power you used, the more efficiently it spread the load. It had been tested against everything from infantry rifles to orbital bombardment in simulation, and in every case the result was the same. The machine was fine. Rowe had looked at the human soldiers in the room when delivering this conclusion. The look was not cruel. It was just the particular kind of look that said, I am explaining this slowly because I am not sure all of you will follow. Dara had seen that look from alien colleagues before. She had stopped being angry about it 2 years ago. Being angry about it wasted energy she could use for other things. If the Draenei recover this unit, Rowe had said, we recommend an immediate review of Coalition tactical positioning on this front. That meant we're going to lose. Commander Saul had caught Dara's eye across the room. Take a look at it when you get a chance at this. Oh, here. She was crouching in the hangar at 9 in the evening with a cold cup of ration coffee balanced on the floor beside her, staring at a joint. The joint was a connection point between the machine's lower leg housing and its foot assembly. It was engineered to an extraordinary degree of precision. The tolerances were, by any measure, perfect. The overlapping plates fit together so cleanly that even under magnification, there was no gap that should not have been there. The resonance matrix material extended through the joint housing in a continuous weave that meant even a strike directly to the joint would be distributed outward. Dara tilted her head. She was not thinking about the resonance matrix. She was thinking about something much simpler. She was thinking about the vending machine in the break room of the Kovash depot on Earth, the one that used to jam on the third slot, and how the only way to get it to release your food was to hit the bottom left corner at an angle with the side of your foot. Not hard, not with any particular force, just a short, sharp, sideways knock with no weight behind it. Every technician at the depot knew the trick. None of them could explain why it worked. It just did. Dara looked at the joint. She looked at the way the resonance material was woven through it. She thought about the vending machine. She picked up her cold coffee, stood up slowly, and went to find Commander Saul. She did not say anything dramatic. She did not have a theory yet, not one she could explain in words. She just had a feeling that sat in the back of her skull like a loose bolt rattling around in an engine casing. The kind of feeling that meant something was off, and that the something was not in the machine, that IT was in the thinking behind the machine. She found Saul in the corridor outside the operations room, going over reports. "I want to spend the night in the hangar," she said, "with whoever is cataloging it." Saul looked at her for a moment. "Linyu from the VLAN team is on overnight documentation duty." "Good," Dara said. Saul nodded once and went back to his reports. Dara went back to the hangar. Linyu was small even by VLAN standards, which meant that standing next to the Kareth Sol unit, the alien looked like a child who had wandered into a room full of adults. Linyu had a scanner in 3 of 4 hands, a documentation tablet in the 4th, and kept moving in tight, efficient circles around the machine's base, logging data in a low, steady murmur that Dara could not quite hear from across the hangar. When Dara walked back in, Linyu stopped and went very still. That was a thing some of the alien species did around humans. They went still. Not afraid exactly. More like an animal that had spotted something it had never encountered before and was waiting to see if it needed a run. Dara was used to it. She held up her empty coffee cup in a sort of greeting and walked to the equipment bench along the west wall, where someone had left a ration heater. "You are the repair specialist," Linyu said. Not question. Linyu's translator gave the words a slightly flat tone, like text being read aloud. "Salvage and maintenance," Dara said. "Da-da." "Linyu." A pause. "You were at the briefing. You did not ask any questions." "I had one. Wasn't ready to ask it yet." Linyu watched her pour hot water into the cup. "What is the question?" Dara sat down on the bench, facing the machine. "I'll get there. Tell me how the resonance matrix works. The real version, not the briefing version." Linyu's posture shifted slightly, the VLAN equivalent of an eyebrow raise from what Dara had picked up. The briefing version was accurate. The briefing version was a summary. "I want the part that takes longer to explain." There was a short silence. Then Linyu walked closer and began to talk. The resonance matrix, as Linyu explained it, was not a single layer of material. It was a system. The outer armor was embedded with a lattice of microsensors so dense they functioned almost like nerve endings. The moment any force touched the surface, any force at all, from a raindrop to a railgun round, the sensors read 3 things simultaneously: the direction of the force, the energy carried by it, and the rate of change in that energy over the first microseconds of contact. From those 3 values, the matrix calculated a response. It shifted the internal density of the armor in the affected area, redirected the structural load outward along pre-mapped channels, and stiffened or softened specific sections to absorb or deflect. The whole cycle took between 2 and 4 milliseconds, depending on the complexity of the incoming force. "Every attack we know of," Linyu said, "has a consistent signature. Energy weapons spike, then sustain. Kinetic rounds have a sharp impact curve. Explosive charges have a pressure wave with a specific expansion rate. The Matrix has been trained on all of them." "Trained," Dara said. "So it learns." "It has learned. Over 40 years of combat data from across 14 war zones." Dara nodded slowly. "What attacks were in the training data?" Linyu listed them. It took a while. "Energy weapons of every known type. Kinetic systems from infantry scale to mass driver. Plasma charges, sonic disruptors, graviton pulse weapons, electromagnetic burst devices, focused thermal lances, and every known variation of alien hand-to-hand combat technique that carried enough force to register as a threat." Dara listened to the whole list. Then she asked, "Did anyone test it against attacks with no consistent signature?" Lin Yu stopped. Défi consiste signature. An attack with no readable pattern. No wind-up. No technique. Something that doesn't look like an attack at all, because the person doing it isn't thinking about attacking. Just moving, without intent. The silence that followed was longer than Dara expected. All attacks have intent, Lin Yu said, but the words came out slower than before. Less certain. All trained attacks have intent, Dara said. Training is the problem. The matrix reads pattern. Pattern means the force has a shape before it lands. Any trained fighter, any fighter who has ever learned how to strike, telegraphs the strike through their body before it happens. There's a pre-motion, a weight shift, a muscle engagement. The sensors pick that up and the matrix is already responding before the hit connects. Lin Yu was very still again. A person who has never been trained, Dara continued, doesn't have a pre-motion pattern. They just move. No weight transfer logic. No consistent strike angle. No readable energy curve because they're not generating force efficiently. They're just throwing themselves at something. She put her coffee down. What does the matrix do when it reads noise? When it picks up a force signature it doesn't recognize as an attack pattern? Lin Yu's 3 scanners lowered slightly. It deprioritizes. Unrecognized low-pattern signals are flagged as environmental contact, debris, incidental touch, a pause. The machine would not engage a full matrix response to something it classified as noise. And if that noise carried enough kinetic force. Lin Yu did not answer for a long time. Dara stood up, walked to the machine, and crouched beside the lower joint again. She studied it the same way she had studied the vending machine at Kovash Depot. Same angle, same patience. "Can I borrow one of your scanners?" she said. The contact force one. Lin Yu walked over and handed it across without speaking. Dara positioned the scanner against the joint housing and looked at the material reading. The resonance matrix ran through the joint in a tight weave. Dense, continuous, no gaps in coverage, but the sensor array was mapped for incoming threat vectors, meaning it was mapped for things coming at the machine. Not for a lateral force, a sideways shove, a short non-directional knock that arrived with no biomechanical pre-signature, because the person delivering it was not, in any technical sense, attacking. They were just hitting something out of frustration. Dara handed the scanner back to Lin Yu. She did not say anything else for a while. She sat on the hangar floor with her back against the wall and her cold coffee in her hands, looking up at 60 feet of perfect alien engineering, and thought about a vending machine on Earth. After a long time, Lin Yu sat down on the floor beside her. IT was an unusual thing for a villain to do. They did not usually sit on floors. "You have a theory," Lin Yu said. "I have something smaller than a theory," Dara said. "I have a question I need to answer with my foot." The formal assessment began at 8 in the morning. The hangar filled slowly. Coalition engineers arrived in clusters, talking in low voices, carrying tablets loaded with overnight skin data. 3 Villain specialists came in behind Ro, who walked to the front of the room with the easy authority of someone who knew exactly what they were going to say and had no interest in being surprised. 2 human officers stood near the back wall. A pair of Krath observers sat on the elevated platform near the east entrance, saying nothing, watching everything. Commander Saul stood to one side with his arms folded, looking at nothing in particular. Dara stood near the machine. She had slept 4 hours on the hangar floor. Lin Yu had slept too, also on the floor, which Dara suspected was the first time the Villain specialist had ever done that. They had not talked much after midnight. There was not much to say. Either the idea was right or it was not, and talking about it more would not change that. Ro called the room to attention without raising a voice. The authority was just there, built in. Overnight analysis confirms all prior assessments. Ro began. The carousel unit is structurally intact and fully operational. No degradation of the resonance matrix has been detected. Our recommendation remains unchanged. This unit represents an insurmountable tactical obstacle. If the Draenei deploy additional units of this class in the current theater, coalition forces cannot hold Sever for. A few people shifted. Nobody argued. We therefore recommend, Ro continued, that Coalition Command begin preparing withdrawal protocols while diplomatic channels are I'd like to say something. The room turned. Dara had not raised her voice. She rarely did. But the words had landed cleanly in a gap between Rose's sentences, and now every face in the hangar was looking at her. Rose's expression did not change. This is a technical briefing. Maintenance personnel are present as observers. Commander Saul asked me to take a look at it, Doris said. I took a look. I have something to share. Ro looked at Saul. Saul unfolded his arms. Let her speak. A pause. Ro stepped to one side with the particular kind of grace that meant. This is a waste of time, but I am too professional to say so out loud. Dara walked to the machine. She stood beside the lower left joint, the same one she had been studying for most of the night. The joint was about 3 feet off the ground, which put it at roughly knee height on the machine and waist height on her. She did not pick up a tool. She did not open a tablet. She did not clear her throat or look at any notes. She pulled her right foot back and kicked the joint. Not hard. Not with any kind of technique. It was a short, sideways, frustrated kick, the kind that came from the hip, not the knee, with no real aim and no follow-through. The kind of kick that happened when something would not cooperate and the part of your brain responsible for patience had finally given up. The sound it made was wrong. Not a clang. Not the flat thud of a boot against armored plating. It was a short, dense crack, like a dense piece of material splitting under stress that had been building for a while. Everyone in the room heard it. Several people stepped forward, automatically on the joint housing. A panel the size of a dinner plate had buckled inward. The edges of the deformation were clean. The resonance matrix material inside, visible through the crack, had fractured along a line about 8 inches long. The room did not make noise for several seconds. Then it made a great deal of noise all at once. Ro moved to the joint faster than Dara had ever seen Avila move. The 3 specialists followed immediately, scanners out. The craft observers stood up from their platform. The human officers near the back wall looked at each other, and then at the machine, and then at Dara. Commander Saul looked at Dara and said nothing. His expression did not change either. But his shoulders dropped about half an inch, which was for Saul the equivalent of a standing ovation. What did you do? Rose said. The voice was not angry. It was sharp in a different way. The sharpness of a person whose model of the world had just been quietly informed that it was missing a variable. Kicked it, Doris said. That is not. Rose stopped. Looked at the scans coming off the joint. Looked at Dara. That is not possible. The matrix response time is sufficient to handle anything it recognizes as an attack, Dara said. I didn't attack it. I kicked it. There's a difference. Linyu was already at the joint, scanner moving over the cracked panel in rapid passes. The impact data, Linyu said quietly. The pre-contact sensor window shows it classified the incoming force as a 3 on the ambient contact scale. Environmental. Non-threat. Because there was no pre-motion signature, Doris said. No stance. No consistent force vector. I just moved my leg sideways. The sensors saw noise. The matrix didn't prep a response. And then the force hit the unprepped section and the housing cracked. The room had gone quiet again. A different kind of quiet from before. Before it had been the quiet of a conclusion. Now it was the quiet of people recalculating. Rose stood at the joint for a long time, looking at the crack. Every attack in the training data, Doris said, was performed by a trained fighter following a trained method. Energy weapons, kinetic rounds, alien combat forms, they all have shape. They all have intent. The Matrix was built to read intent. She looked up at the machine. I didn't have any. Ro turned slowly. The gray face was unreadable. I was just annoyed, Doris said. Nobody laughed. But 2 of the human officers in the back very carefully looked at the floor. By midday, the crack in the joint panel had been scanned 47 times by 6 different instruments. The data from all 6 agreed. The resonance matrix had failed to initiate a response because the impact had not crossed any threat threshold the system recognized. Force without pattern. Movement without intent. The Matrix had seen something it had no category for and had done what any system did with data it could not classify. T had ignored it. Ro locked the hangar to senior personnel only and spent 3 hours reviewing the full contact log from the machine sensor array. Dara sat against the wall and waited. Linyu brought her food from the mess, which was not required and not asked for, and sat nearby while she ate. The three Velan specialists did not speak to Dara. They spoke around her in low technical voices, working through the matrix data with the focused misery of engineers watching something they had built their careers on develop. An unexpected seemed at IT around the third hour. Rose straightened up from the analysis console. The flaw exists, Rose said, to no one in particular. The words came out like a diagnosis. Flat, accurate, costing something. The sensor array operates on a recognition model. It identifies known threat patterns and initiates response. Unknown force signatures with low energy variance are classified as ambient contact and filtered. If the energy value of that contact exceeds the housing tolerance before the matrix initiates a secondary review cycle. A pause. The housing takes the full load, unassisted. How long is the secondary review cycle? Dara asked. Ro did not look at her. 8 milliseconds. So if the hit is fast enough, it's already done before the secondary check kicks in. Yes. And an untrained strike is faster to land than a trained one because there's no pre-motion delay. Ro still did not look at her. Also yes. Saul had rejoined the group by then. He waited for Ro to finish, then asked the question everyone in the room was thinking. Can this be replicated in combat conditions? Is this a usable tactic or a single anomaly? Ro was quiet long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. Linyu spoke instead. Structurally, the flaw applies to any exterior joint and several sections of the torso housing where the resonance matrix runs in a single-layer weave. Roughly 30% of the surface area. A glance at Dara. If a strike reaches those areas with sufficient force and no pre-motion signature, the matrix will not respond in time. Define sufficient force, one of the human officers said from the back. 300 newtons applied laterally, Linyu said. Approximately the force of a strong human kick. The room processed that. Then Ro finally turned and looked at Dara, not with the earlier dismissiveness, not with warmth either. Something more uncomfortable than either. The look of a person who had been carrying a belief they considered settled and was being required, carefully, to set it down. This is not a battle strategy, Ro said. One soldier kicking a war machine is not a tactical solution. The conditions required are extremely narrow. The attacker must have no combat training, no consistent strike pattern, and sufficient force. That combination is extremely human, Saul said quietly. Ro stopped. We were never taught your combat forms, Saul continued. Human soldiers in the Coalition receive basic Coalition doctrine, but the older combat techniques, the formal systems your academies produce, we were not included in that training. Nobody thought it was worth the time. He paused. That means we have an entirely separate movement vocabulary. No shared patterns. No recognizable pre-motions. Another pause. And we hit hard enough. Ro looked at the cracked panel. Looked at Saul. Looked at the floor. The Velan Collective did not design this flaw intentionally, Ro said, which was as close to embarrassment as engineering pride would allow. Of course not, Saul said. You built against everything you knew. That's exactly the problem. Dara had been listening to all of this the way she listened to engines. Not for the loudest noise, but for the small, irregular sounds underneath. The thing no one had said, yet was the thing she was waiting for. Ro said it, finally. If we report this to the broader coalition, the Draenei will eventually learn of it. They have ears in every room above my clearance level. They will patch the flaw within 2 production cycles. How long is 2 production cycles? Saul asked. 3 months. Perhaps 4. Then we have a window. Ro did not agree out loud. But neither did Ro disagree. Saul turned to Dara. Can you teach this? Can you train a team to fight without pattern? Dara thought about it honestly. Not to fight without pattern. You can't untrain people. But I can teach them to break pattern on purpose. Short window, specific movements. Hit something the way you'd hit something that frustrated you. Not the way you'd hit something you were trying to hurt. She paused. It's harder than it sounds. Trained soldiers have to actively stop doing what they know. Human soldiers, Saul said, and any alien volunteers who are willing to feel extremely undignified for a few weeks. There was a small silence. Linyu raised one hand slightly. I would like to be considered for that. Ro turned to look at the young specialist with an expression that carried about 6 separate feelings, none of them comfortable. General Vortak, 40 miles away in the Drenai command post, received a short report from a source inside the Coalition base. The report was vague. Something had happened with the Kareth Sol unit. Something involving a human. Vortak set the report down and looked at the tactical map for a long time. He had spent 9 years building the Kareth Sol line. He had watched it hold against everything the galaxy could produce. He did not believe a human could threaten it. But he had been in enough wars to know that the things you did not believe were often the things that required the most urgent attention. He began drafting a counterattack order. The training looked ridiculous. Dara knew it looked ridiculous. She had accepted that within the first 20 minutes of day one, when a decorated Coalition soldier with 11 years of combat experience threw a punch at the practice dummy and pulled it halfway through because the trained part of his brain refused to commit to something so structurally wrong. "Stop aiming," Dara said for the 4th time. "I am not aiming," the soldier said, which was a lie his entire body was telling. "Your shoulder dropped before your arm moved. That's a tell. The sensors would have that read before your fist landed." She walked over and stood beside him. "Hit it the way you'd hit a door that won't open. Not to break the door, just because the door is being a problem." He tried again. Better. Still not right. In the far corner, Linyu was practicing something that looked like a stumbling, sideways elbow drop, which was technically not wrong, but was deeply strange to watch. 2 other alien volunteers, a Krath soldier and a Voss scout, were working through similar exercises with the focused discomfort of people doing something that violated every principle they had been trained on. They were not learning to fight. Dara had been clear about that from the start. They were learning to stop fighting for long enough to do one specific thing. Land one unpatterned strike on a specific target zone. The joint housing, the torso weave sections, the knee pivots. Hit it wrong. Hit it badly. Hit like you're not sure what you're doing and do not particularly care. But you're doing it anyway. 2 weeks was not enough time. But 2 weeks was what they had, because Ro had calculated the likely timeline before Drenai intelligence caught enough threads to act. Ro observed the training sessions every day. Never participated. Never commented during the sessions themselves. Took extensive notes. Once on the 4th day, Ro arrived early and stood watching the empty training space for 10 minutes before anyone else arrived, as if doing calculations that required silence. On the 12th day, a scan alert came in for the eastern perimeter. Dara was in the middle of explaining weight distribution when Saul walked into the training room with the look she had learned to read over 6 years. Not emergency urgent, but close. "Drenai forces are moving on Sever 4, he said. Vortak is leading it personally. 2 Kareth Sol units at the front. 2 units. Dara had not known there was more than one. She looked at her team. 14 people. 11 human, 2 alien, 1 Lenyu. 12 of them were competent. 7 were close to ready. 2 were actually ready, which was herself and a young human soldier called Ferret, who had taken to the training faster than anyone else because, in Dara's estimation, Ferret had never quite absorbed formal combat doctrine properly, and had therefore less to unlearn. "How long?" Dara asked. 90 minutes before they hit the outer defenses. She looked at Ferret, then at Lenyu, then at the rest of the team, who were all looking at her. "All right," she said. "We go with what we have." The battle for Sever 4 began messily and got messier. The Drenai pushed through the eastern corridor in hard, disciplined waves, and the Coalition defense bent, but held. The Kareth Sol units moved behind the advance, not leading, but following close, waiting for the line to break enough to send them through. Dara and her team were staged in the secondary corridor, behind a barricade of salvaged hull plating. She could hear the machines before she could see them, not their weapons, their movement. The deep, rhythmic weight of something very large walking across deck, plating with absolute confidence. The first machine came around the corridor bend, and the Coalition line at the front broke almost immediately. Not in panic, in tactical withdrawal, because Saul had given the order. "Fall back. Let advance. Give a team a clear approach window." Dara moved. She did not feel brave. She did not feel the kind of sharp, cold focus that soldiers described in combat memoirs. She felt the way she felt when a complex repair was not going well, and there was only one option left. Go at it directly and deal with whatever came next. Her team spread into the positions they had drilled. Not a formation. That was the point. 7 people approaching from 7 different angles with no synchronized timing and no shared doctrine. Moving like a crowd crossing a street that suddenly decided to walk into something. The machine's sensors were reading them. Dara knew that. It was pulling threat data from 14 different directions, sorting signals, waiting for patterns to emerge so it could prepare a response. Military personnel, coming toward it, but moving wrong. No tactical geometry. No fire coordination. No doctrinal approach vector. Noise. 17 different pieces of noise. Ferret hit the left knee pivot first. Not well. Not with any technique. Ferret stumbled forward off a piece of debris, and the recovery put a steel-capped boot sideways into the joint housing with about as much elegance as a person falling downstairs. The housing cracked along a 4-inch line. The machine's left leg stuttered. One step, a recovery. But the movement was wrong now, slightly off axis. Then Dara hit the torso weave section with her elbow on the way past, not a strike, more like running into a wall, and felt the material give slightly under the impact. A small sound, the kind of structure made when something inside it had stopped being continuous. The second machine was farther back. Linyu reached it first, which nobody had planned. Linyu ran into its ankle housing at full speed from an angle that suggested either extreme bravery or a navigation error, hit it with both shoulder and elbow in a completely uncoordinated way, and bounced off. But the ankle housing buckled in 2 places. The Krath soldier hit the knee from above, jumping from a raised platform and landing badly, one foot connecting with the side of the joint in a completely wrong angle. The joint's lateral stabilizer cracked through. The second machine went down to one knee. The first had stopped moving entirely, its left leg seized. The Draenei forces behind them had stopped advancing. Vortak, watching from a command position 300 meters back, saw his 2 invulnerable machines being dismantled by what appeared to be a group of people who did not entirely know what they were doing. He ordered the retreat that IT was the most reluctant order he had ever given. 3 days after the battle, the Draenei Alliance requested a ceasefire. The request came through formal channels with the particular careful wording of people who needed time to understand what had happened to them. Vortak's name was on the document. The language was precise and gave nothing away. But Saul, reading it at the operations table, said it had the texture of something written by someone who had not slept properly since the retreat. The ceasefire was accepted for a period of 30 days, which was enough time for both sides to do what they actually needed to do. Think, the coalition held its own debrief 2 days into the ceasefire. It was held in the same operations room as the original briefing, with most of the same people. Roe stood at the front again. The difference was that Roe was no longer delivering a conclusion. Roe was delivering a record. The engineering report was thorough. It covered the resonance matrix flaw in full technical detail, including the sensor window gap, the ambient classification threshold, and the specific surface zones vulnerable to unrecognized impact force. It included the training methodology Dara had developed and the combat results from the engagement. It named every member of the team who had participated, with their actions noted individually. Dara's name appeared at the top of the findings section. Not at the end as an acknowledgement. At the top as the source. Roe did not say anything personal about it. The report said it clearly and without ambiguity, and that was Roe's version of saying it out loud. After the debrief, Linyu found Dara in the corridor outside and walked alongside her for a while without saying anything. This had become a recognizable pattern over the past 2 weeks. Linyu would appear near Dara and walk with her, and eventually a question would come out. "How did you know," Linyu said, finally, "that no one had tested for it?" Dara thought about how to answer honestly. "I didn't know. I just noticed that the machine was built by people who had thought about everything. And when someone has thought about everything, there are usually a few things they stop counting because they seem too small. A human kick seemed too small. A human anything seemed too small," Dara said, without bitterness. "That's not a complaint. It was useful." Linyu was quiet for a moment. Rowe reviewed all of the design documentation last night. The Carrot Soul project ran for 41 years. There were 312 engineers across 9 species. A pause. No humans were involved at any stage. I know. If one had been, they'd have found it in testing, Dara said. Or they'd have built it out from the start. She shrugged. That's the thing about a blind spot. You only find it by looking from somewhere you weren't looking from before. They reached the intersection where their paths split. Linyu stopped. 3 alien engineering guilds have submitted requests to Commander Saul for access to the full analysis, Linyu said. The Velan Technical Board has opened a formal review of pattern recognition combat systems. And the Krath Military Council sent a message this morning asking whether human strike pattern advisors could be attached to their combat engineering review teams. Dara processed that for a moment. Human advisors, she said, for combat engineering doctrine review. Linyu paused. That is not a junior position. That is not an observer role. Dara looked at the floor for a moment. Not with emotion she wanted to put words to. Just acknowledging a shift in something that had been sitting in one place for a long time. Tell Saul I'm available, she said, after I finish the coolant coupling on Base 7. It's been leaking for 4 days, and at this point it's personal. Linyu's posture shifted in the Velan way that meant something between a nod and a smile. I will tell him. Dara went back to the hangar. The original Carrot Soul unit was still there, pushed to one side against the east wall. Nobody had repaired it. Nobody had decided yet whether to dismantle it, study it further, or leave it as it was. It sat in the corner of the hangar with its cracked panels still open, the fractured line in the resonance matrix clearly visible, and it still looked like something a god had left behind. Dara walked past it without stopping. Base 7 was at the far end of the hangar. The shuttle with the coolant coupling problem had been sitting on the pad since before the battle, tagged for repair and repeatedly deprioritized in favor of the war machine situation. The coupling had been leaking a slow, steady drip onto the deck plating for 4 days. There was a small puddle. Someone had put a collection tray under it, which was a reasonable short-term solution and a sign that nobody had actually fixed anything. Dara pulled a repair kit from the equipment rack, ducked under the shuttle's belly, looked at the coupling for a moment, and got to work. The coupling was a standard type 4 connector that had been incorrectly torqued during the last service cycle. Not a complicated problem, not a heroic one, just a thing that needed doing because it had not been done right the first time, and it was going to keep causing problems until someone got under the shuttle and fixed it properly. She worked for about 40 minutes. The hangar was quiet. Through the wall, she could hear the distant sounds of the base settling into the unusual calm of a ceasefire. Fewer alarms, fewer boots moving fast down corridors, fewer conversations held at the volume of people who expected to be interrupted at any moment by something urgent. She finished the coupling, checked the seal, ran a pressure test, and packed up the kit. On her way out, she passed the Carrot Soul unit again. She glanced at the cracked panel, at the clean, fractured line in the material that had been, 3 weeks ago, considered an absolute certainty. Perfect things had edges, she thought. The edges were always where someone had stopped asking questions. She turned off the hangar lights and went to find dinner.